Hi, Shruti. Hi, Joanna.
Hi,
Hello.
Om.
Hello, this is Om. Thank you.
Hi, nice to
Hi,
meet
Om.
you.
Good to see you.
Same here. Thank you. I've been thinking about this topic for a long time. I go to a natural food expo conference once a year, and where they display maybe more than 50,000 products. And this year the theme was CBD oil.
Mm-hmm.
And
Love
everybody
it.
was talking, and every company I went to, I said, what does CBD does? So everybody has different views. So I'll be very happy, curious to know what the differences are.
All right. Well, good. I'm glad you're
Awesome.
here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Where are you located? Where do you go to this show?
I go to Baltimore. It happens twice a year, once in Anaheim, and second time in Baltimore in September and March. So
Okay,
this is
good.
called Natural Food Expo, which happens, I think, once in Hong Kong. So 3 times in a year, where all the natural food manufacturers, they come and display their products. They have educational programs. Most of the health counselor or practitioner, they also come there to witness it.
Oh, I'll have to put that on my watch list.
Yes, you want, I can.
50,000? That overwhelms me just to hear that.
Yes, it is overwhelming. So I used to go 2 or 3 days a conference time, but now I limit to 1 time because the products are changing. I went for education to see what's new coming up and how they're protecting the food supplements and different ways to market it. One thing I observed this time, was one main, and almost every supplement company was putting ashwagandha in their formulations. And I said, how do you know ashwagandha will help along with all the vitamins? No, this is a good product. We should have it.
Well, it's funny because when I first started making products, I had this idea of my first product was going to be an ashwagandha blend, but ashwagandha to do it in the way that the CBD oil, I'll talk about it in a few minutes, but how it needs to be blended. I really didn't see how I could do that right off the bat, both financially and have it really work synergistically the way it can and it should. But there was a lot of I'm too small. It's like, that's going to have to come later because the ashwagandha, there's a lot of work that goes involved with that.
So what I see is that we beat the products to so much. For example, now they are after moringa powder, and moringa is a complete powder for complete amino acids, but it has some anomalies of increasing the potassium level in your blood if you're not careful. So they're marketing because we want to have muscles build up for protein, and this is a highest, richest source of proteins, all amino acids there. But without realizing that there are some other trace elements which are not desired. So
it's like taking the curcumin from the turmeric and put it in every product. It's like not
exactly.
the
same. Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
I'll shut up.
So thanks, Om, for sharing that. Sounds like a pretty interesting event. I see several folks are online now, so maybe we want to get started and give time for Jo to really take us through her talk. So welcome everybody. Great to see you all here. If you haven't dropped a few lines introducing yourself in the chat window, please do that so that everybody knows who you are and can possibly connect with you after if they're interested. And I'm really happy to have our second speaker event today as part of the Women in Ayurveda series. So happy that you could join us, Joanna. Really looking forward to your talk today. I want to do a quick intro and then hand over to Jo. She'll share her talk for about 45 minutes, and then we'll keep some time in the end for questions. Also, if you have questions through the talk, then please also feel free to share them in the chat window, and then Jo can take them at the end. So with that, let me just do a quick introduction. So, if you don't know Jo already, she's dedicated her life to learning and teaching about yoga, Ayurveda, and cannabis. She founded and directs Cannaveda Counseling, And she also has her own line of high quality organic CBD rich Ayurveda CBD tinctures, salves, oils, bitters, and other personal care products. And this line of products goes by Zveda Botanicals. This is approved as part of the Project CBD Hemp Company. And she's also highly, and also is well regarded in the medical cannabis community. In terms of her education, she is certified as an Ayurvedic wellness counselor from Kerala Ayurveda Academy, as well as American Institute of Vedic Studies. So that's amazing. And she is also a certified cannabis counselor from the Medical Cannabis Institute. So without much further ado, Joe, please, the floor is yours. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. And thank you all of you that came today and are checking in. This is such a fun virtual world that we live in at times, to be able to share like this from, I'm in the snowy Pacific Northwest, and I know we're in various parts of the country. You know, one of the things that Shruti asked me when I had this talk was to talk about kind of my personal story. And basically what I'm here to do is to try to inspire people to learn about this plant that has been ostracized and vilified for a good 80 to 100 years now. And you know, the way that I came to this is it's a kind of a circuitous route. And like most people, I think in the healing community, we tend to come to this place because of our own struggles. And that's pretty much what happened with me. So I'll give a little background first. To how I came to be in this place. And when I was a teenager, I was diagnosed with, well, first of all, when I was a teenager, I kept getting sick, and mostly infections, throat infections. It's so interesting to look at it now, going back at that time, and wish I knew now what I knew then. But what happened, like often happens when you're in the allopathic system, is I was continuously put on antibiotics. Without knowing, I was destroying my gut biome. And I was also a very driven Pitta with a bit of Vata and a Virgo all at once personality, trying to get, you know, the perfect grades and be the perfect kid and not being a perfect kid. Living in a very conservative home environment, very structured, very religious, military in the South. So I had a bit of a karmic struggle to start with because I was a bit of a wild child deep down. And so by the time I hit college, I think everything perfect storm, stress and some issues of my religion and spirituality were kind of coinciding. And I believe the genetics of Crohn's disease, which is what I was ultimately diagnosed with, all kind of came in at once. And I got really sick when I was 19. And when I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease immediately, because my dad had been diagnosed and been on pharmaceuticals for this for about 20 years at that point. So it wasn't a surprise necessarily, but it was a surprise that I got so sick so quickly my sophomore year. So I was immediately put on pharmaceuticals, immune suppressant drugs to really dampen the ability of my immune system to work. I had a really hard time keeping weight down. I was either chronic constipation or chronic diarrhea. There was really no in between. Made it very challenging to make it through my classes. So I had special medical passes through college to miss class, to run to the bathroom, to deal basically. Through this time, I either was immediately allergic to drugs that they gave me, like hives and high fevers and, you know, potential death if I don't stop taking it that moment, or I just became accustomed to where different organ systems would start to suffer throughout my experience. And that took me through into my 30s, basically. Late 20s, I had 2 children, 21 months apart, and that took about the rest of any energy I had left to stay well away from me. I was extremely sick during my second child's pregnancy. When I was pregnant with him, it was an unplanned pregnancy. I mean, a very welcome unplanned pregnancy, but my at the time husband and I had a 1-year-old, and I was really suffering with my health. And so I didn't have the strength, nor did they think it was safe for my body to have another pregnancy. I was also a new patient. I had just started an IV, a chemotherapy treatment that was being targeted for Crohn's disease that was made from mouse antibodies. And because I was one of the first patients in the United States, I was watched like a hawk, and it was never discussed with me about getting pregnant again. I think it was just assumed that I wasn't going to. So that really changed the trajectory of my future, because when my son Jake was born, pretty quickly after his birth, he started having health issues, mostly skin, very extreme eczema. It was just awful to try to have a baby that was in so much pain. He also was allergic to everything. I mean, everything. And I didn't have enough breast milk to feed him because I didn't have enough nutrition. So we had this like spiraling out of control health crisis going on with a 1-year-old, or up, 1 to 2-year-old. And at the time, my husband traveled internationally for long periods of time. So all of us suffered our health through that. And that gave me a very strong determination to find alternative methods, which I had been trying since my diagnosis. So since 1991, I had been searching for ways to treat and heal from my disease. I just didn't accept what was told to me. I have no idea why. I wasn't grown up. I wasn't raised in a family of doctors or nurses. I was raised in a family of lawyers and military and engineers and thinkers, like in that way. And it was very clear to me from like my parents and even my ex-husband that you do what the doctor says. And the doctors pretty much told me that I would be sick for the rest of my life. I would be on pharmaceuticals for the rest of my life. My immune system would always be compromised. And there's a long list of foods that I can never eat again. So it was pretty bleak. And because I kept reacting poorly after a certain amount of years of different drugs, they were constantly trying to find new medications for me. I ended up on a chemical cocktail. It goes through, antidepressants, and can't sleep, and my periods are bad. So they put me on a pill, to prednisone for inflammation, to products for my elimination. It was just insane. And I knew it wasn't normal. And even before we had the internet to do research, I was going to bookstores and libraries. And I was also seeing Chinese acupuncturists doing massage, whatever I could. I couldn't afford much of it, but I did what I could. Finally, in 2004, it became so severe that I was bedridden. I had not had a proper bowel movement in 6 weeks. And I was, my lungs, heart, and liver were all very, very threatened from the medications. And I had become allergic to the intravenous chemotherapy, but my doctors just gave me Benadryl and told me to rest. So I was, young and 2 little kids and trying to figure this all out. And I finally had another doctor step in who was not a gastroenterologist, and obstetrician, OBGYN. And because I was always going in to have ultrasounds done of my pelvis because the pain was so excruciating. And I kept thinking that there must be something else going on. But repeatedly, I was told that it was just the bundle of nerves because of my Crohn's and the backed up fecal matter in my intestines and all of these other things, which I believe was true to a point. And this was just absolute desperation. So I was referred to cancel or to fire my doctors, which was very quickly and easily done, and to go to the university in Portland, Oregon, where I lived nearby, and see their specialist, who immediately recommended emergency surgery. However, because my terminal ileum was completely closed off and I was at risk of sepsis. And I mean, I couldn't drink water. It literally would just come right out of my mouth if I swallowed, because there was nowhere for it to go. So that doctor, however, also the surgeon couldn't operate on me because I was on such a high level of prednisone because of the inflammation. And every time I tried to scale down, I wouldn't be able to drink water. So it was like this crazy story of I need to eat, I need to poop, I need to drink water, but they all couldn't happen simultaneous or even in the same day. And so I had to wait, kind of laying in bed waiting for about 6 weeks, until finally we just had to risk it and have the surgery anyways, where I had a small bowel resective surgery. So they took out parts of my small intestine and colon, appendix, and the ileocecal valve that connects those things together. So before I went into this surgery, very excited, and everyone around me was terrified I was going to die on the table, but I was just happy to take the disease part of my body out, because that's the only answer I knew at the time. When I came out of that surgery many hours later and started recovering, which took about 6 months, because it's a big vertical incision. They take everything out of your torso, your intestines come out on the table, cut it up, put it back in. It's a long recovery. I don't really think I understood how intense it was going to be for me, because I was at such a weakened state. And again, I didn't understand the rejuvenation therapies yet. I had no concept of Ayurveda except for what I learned from being a yoga student. So now I'm post-surgery with a little morphine haze, and I decided then and there I was done with pharmaceuticals as soon as I got through this. And I told my doctor that after about a few months of the recovery process, they put me back on a new chemotherapy, new to me, not a new drug, methotrexate, which I was recommended to inject in subcutaneously into my stomach for the rest of my life every week. And I said no, and my doctors and I went back and forth for a few months, and I started having some pain again, which now I understand that pain I could have rectified probably with some cumin and fennel seeds, but at the time I panicked, and that's how I was put on this drug. And after 3 weeks of nausea and hair loss and vertigo and migraines, I quit and said, I'd rather die than take this drug. And so the team of doctors at Oregon Health and Science University fired me. We fired each other, and I went on my own. And around that same time, I decided it was time to really start learning as much yoga as I could, because I had a feeling that was going to take me on my path. I was just really getting on my path of yoga at that point. And soon after, we moved to San Diego for work. And while down there, immediately I met Deepak Chopra's personal assistant, who was part of my yoga teacher training, because I was becoming a yoga teacher with through the lineage of Paramahansa Yogananda, and I just found these amazing teachers. And all of a sudden, Ayurveda was just a part of this language, and I had just read about it, and I didn't understand it. And so I immediately went to see someone, and who was recommended to me, and that started my path. I wrote down in a book, I'm going to study Ayurveda. This is the rest. This is my path. This is my dharma, and which I did. So I went through my training for both Ayurveda and yoga over the next few years. So to bring the cannabis side into it, all along, going back to living in the South in a very rigid environment and having a disease, many chronic illnesses going on, every once in a while, I smoked a little bit of pot because it helped me eat, and it helped with my nausea, and it actually helped me focus, which this is before I knew or anybody talked about ADD, or that was even something I even considered being an issue. But it was if anything, it caused more stress because of the guilt of doing this illegal thing. So I struggled with something that clearly helped me in very small amounts, but that at the same time, it created anxiety and a different kind of stomach issue and pain because of the guilt of what I was doing. So now I'm in my 30s. I'm living in California. They're voting on medical, or maybe they've just voted, I can't remember. And I read somewhere that medical marijuana helps to cure, if not relieve, all effects of Crohn's disease. And I was like, wait a minute. Well, I know that, but I didn't know that I would never make that statement. Like, to me, that was an overblown statement. Like, come on, it helps with some of it, but it sure as heck never cured me of anything. And so I started researching, and I met a woman who has a yoga teacher down there, and we became very good friends. And she had already been doing a lot of research for PTSD for her own and for some other people in her world that was kind of her specialty. She did ancestral healing and tantric work, and now she was exploring the world of cannabis. And she gave me kind of a premonition that someone in my life is going to be diagnosed with cancer, and it's going to be severe and terminal. And the only way that I could help them is if I start learning about cannabis in its form, its oil form. And I was struck sideways. I was like, okay, where do I start? And so we dove in together. And that was in 2008. And we just started learning and sharing articles and calling each other and said, did you know this? And did you know that? Oh, I had no idea, because it's been suppressed, because our government has suppressed it from us for almost 100 years for greedy interests, none of which did I know. And so this then took me to the next phase in my life, where my dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And this came in 2015. And so we'd had many years to kind of prepare, but I still had no idea what was left to learn. And when my dad was diagnosed, I was there with him. He lives in Atlanta. And so we were at Emory University with the top oncologist for melanoma. My dad had metastatic melanoma in his lungs, stomach, adrenal gland, and lymph node. And they said it was pretty much too far metastasized and to try what they have that wouldn't work. Chemo wouldn't work, which I was actually grateful for, in a way. And however, they have some targeted immunotherapy that we could try. However, it can cause severe bouts of colitis or Crohn's. Basically, you can just destroy the lining of your colon in no time and bleed out. So my vote was, let's not do that drug, because my dad already has a history of Crohn's disease. and takes pharmaceuticals for it anyways. And my dad also was on medications for high blood pressure, for chronic diarrhea, for acid reflux. He's a pitta. He was retired as an Army colonel and was a federal prosecutor. So just to put that into perspective. And a very, very strong Southern man. And he eats like that, and he drinks whatever he wants to drink, and he plays golf. So he's not like many of the men of his age. And at the time he was in his late 60s in the area where I live on the West Coast. It's very different, more sedated lifestyle. So I gave my dad my 2 cents worth, which rarely does he take very seriously because of such background. And he listened. And he said, because he was desperate and he was terrified, absolutely terrified. And he was still working full time. He had his own law firm that he'd been building since 1989. And he has a full staff and caseloads and all of this, and my mom to take care of in his mind. So we sat down and I explained what it would look like and what I understood, and how if he was willing to walk this path with me and realize that I'm going to be learning as much as I can on top of what I already know, that I think we have a really good potential for helping at least stop the spreading of his cancer, if not start killing the cancer cells himself. Because at this point I understood that enough. So he said, okay. And we started immediately. You know, I have contacts, and I made phone calls, and we watched videos, and we made oil, and we had crazy things happen, but it worked. And as far as getting the oil together, and we started on it. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later about the dosing. So long story short, after his first set of scans, a couple of the tumors had visibly gotten smaller. It was shocking. And that usually doesn't happen with melanoma. It's fast spreading. And that's why it's kind of the silent killer, because you don't even know you have it. You don't feel anything until it's too late, and then it's pretty intense pain. At this time, the doctors at Emory said that he should, why not try that drug? It might help. And so we had a very huge disagreement, because my dad doesn't really have an understanding of the human body, and he's a very trustworthy man of doctors, especially a doctor of his age and his caliber, who plays golf and lives in Atlanta. He's going to win out over, you know, the yoga left coast Birkenstock wearing marijuana oil recommending daughter. So I lost that battle. And my dad, after 3 of 29 treatments, ended up in the ER bleeding out and almost died. And so thankfully, Dr. Jay Rajan came to my rescue and helped me get some herbs to him immediately. And we got him well, like, so fast. So between the cannabis oil and different Ayurvedic herbs that he was already taking, once we got him out of the ER and home, back on some gentler supplements, he recovered, which was amazing. And I want to also say that after he started this regimen of different Ayurvedic herbs and essential oils and change in diet, this was in June of 2015, within a few weeks, he didn't need any Crohn's drugs. He didn't need, and that was his choice, not mine. I never told him to stop taking anything, but he stopped taking his meds. He stopped taking his blood pressure medicine because his blood pressure was going too low. He didn't need it. He stopped taking his reflux. He no longer had diarrhea with the herbs that he was taking from an Ayurvedic protocol. And he felt great. He looked better than he'd ever looked, and he was sleeping more than he's ever slept. So all things good were happening, but he was mentally and intellectually challenged to listen to the doctors at Emory, because they wanted to do something, of course. And so once we got out of that, they said, well, that was a mistake. We should have never put you on that drug, of course. And we went back to what we were doing, which was high THC oils and also high CBD oils, along with many other things. Each time he got a scan, his different tumors got smaller. And it was just incredible. And every time he would go in, I wouldn't sleep for like 24 hours, because I literally feel like my dad's life is in my hands at this moment. And each time they would get busy and forget to call me the next day with these results that everything was fine. So I don't think my parents were realizing what this was doing to me and how important this was. Because I was also learning. He was a complete guinea pig to me at this time, and it was terrifying. But he kept getting better, and so now here we are. It's 2020. His last set of scans was a few months ago, maybe in November or December, and they basically extended the time until the next scans, because now it's like little calcifications He's not cancer free. I can't say we cured his cancer, but I can say that he is in a completely different place than he was in 2015. He had gone off all of his Crohn's medications, and they actually told him after his last colonoscopy that there was no sign of Crohn's disease in his lower intestine, or excuse me, in his small intestine. However, they put him back on a pharmaceutical, which then caused side effects, which he then took the next drug, and now he's back to where he was before. He hasn't put two and two together that the meds are causing the problems. And I've kind of given up on that one. So I learned a lot, and what that did for me is, and during that time I did online classes to become certified. There's some international and national groups that, and there's way more options now than there were even 3 years ago. So there's more options to where you can take classes and get certified. The reason I chose the program I did at the Medical Cannabis Institute is that it's aligned with a man named Dr. Shaughnessy. Shaughnessy, I can't think of his first name now. And he was a doctor from England who was studying in India and learning about Ayurveda and allopathic medicine back in the early 1800s. And he is the first person that we know that was a doctor that tested some theories of using the cannabis plant, making oils out of it and helping it, because he learned about the seizures, that it stops seizures for many people. So he started with animals, and then he saved a baby's life that was born with epilepsy. And that kind of rocked the medical community, because he was taking into consideration things that we had already known through history, but were already starting to be eliminated from information and education because of pharmaceutical interests and others. So that kind of catches up to how I got to where I am. Since then, I have been helping people without even trying, really, without meaning to. I mean, with cancer and other illnesses and diseases. I already had an Ayurveda small practice that I've done either out of a small office or out of my home in various places, Kentucky, California, and now Washington and Oregon. And I decided in 2015 or maybe 16 to go public, which was a big deal for me. And to say, I'm learning about cannabis. I know that it works for many people, and here's why. And kind of creating a vulnerability around my practice that I wasn't sure which way it was going to go. It created a lot more interest. Most of my clients are, I would say, over 65, if not over 70, and they're desperate for new ways of doing things. It's harder for them to make major habit changes. So this is something that can help them with some of their immediate needs, but also some of the chemical imbalances that might be created, some of their long-term chronic issues. So again, I'm just constantly learning. I still have so much to learn. And as I'm learning, scientists around the world are learning. There has been so much research coming out of, it started in Israel mostly back, and I'll get to that here once I get to my, my slideshow. In the late 50s, Dr. Robert Meshulam started studying the plant. He would smuggle hashish into the hospital where he worked and started looking at it under a microscope. And he is the first doctor that actually started naming and seeing that this plant has all of these cannabinoids. It has all of these parts of the plant, these
Guys, I'm just trying to contact Joe here. She's trying to dial back in, so give us a few minutes. We'll be back on.
On drugs. And with that, you know, we have our own sense of idea of what something is, even though deep down I used to remember saying, but it's just a plant. I don't get it. It's just a plant. So the more I started diving in, I realized this plant has a history of far wider than anyone really understood, unless this has been what they've been practicing and learning their whole life. It has history in India with Ayurveda, Chinese pharmacopoeia, Persian and Greek medicine have references to different recipes and different uses of the plant. Up until 1930s, it was in, right now the number's at 250. The last I read, it could have changed by now, different formulas in the United States. You know, your cough syrups, different pain medications often would have cannabis sativa on the ingredient list. It wasn't being sold as a recreational, it was just an ingredient as a synergizer, basically, that I've learned. It was an ingredient in many different formulas. It actually, in the 2023 BC, I forget the exact year, 2300 BC, the Emperor of China actually claimed that the cannabis plant was one of the most revered and important in their Chinese pharmacopoeia. And he used it and recommended it for, in this writing, for basically what we would call ADD, for helping when your attention you have attention deficit or you have a hard time organizing your thoughts, which is interesting. In the next slide, again, I just kind of showed some time frame. What is really interesting, in Portland, Oregon, there's a group of scientists called the Phylos Project, and these scientists are tracing the genetics, the DNA of the plant. And it is in many ways, from what they told me, because I've gotten to meet some of them and have lunch and kind of pick their brain, it's changing the migration maps of the United States, of the world, of how people lived and moved around because of where we're finding evidence of the seed, we're finding evidence of the plant in medicinal forms, in cave drawings, in papers and tombs. It's really fascinating how it's gotten to where it is. I put in the middle of this timeline the cannabis in Dr. William O'Shaughnessy. He's the one that found that it works so well to stop seizures and has some kind of effect on the nervous system. What happened in America and how we got to this point of prohibition is it became a huge competitor for the large barons of the industries of cotton, of paper, timber, and also the new world of pharmaceuticals, which was being based often, as many of you probably know, off the German models. And many of the medicines that were being created were actually waste material from the new fossil fuel industry. So we had a lot of drugs being pumped over and studied in some really horrible ways, looking at the Nazi Germany, to where they were trying to figure out ways to use chemicals and what the effects were and how they could make money. Because of this, they decided that they had to stop hemp and cannabis in its tracks because it's cheap, it's easy to grow, and it makes everything. Anything you make with plastic, you can make with hemp. Anything with paper, you can make with hemp. And so even though it was one of the top cash crops in the United States, it was taxed so heavily and then seized by the US government for the war effort, and then quickly over the next 40 years became one of the #1 drugs that Nixon targeted because he wanted to keep segregation. And the only way they could do that was through a back door by opening prisons, creating a private prison system, creating an unnecessary drug enforcement agency, and then targeting people of color and people that weren't white, basically, people who did not agree with the war effort. And those people were charged with now having a crime for using a plant that has been forever used and put in jail. And that is how we got to where we are today. The United States government pressured governments of pretty much every important country around the world to do the same thing, or they would not do trade with them, so they could increase the trade from the petroplastics and lumber and others. So it's a very, very dirty past to create something that's criminal that was actually helping so many people at once. The next slide we can just kind of pass through. That's what I was talking about. The Flexner report is what basically got us to the place of the high tax. This guy wrote a letter for some of that he was paid for with grant money from some of the big oil barons, and he was a school teacher. He had no idea what he was talking about. This then influenced the American Medical Association with misinformation. The American Medical Association actually came back later and tried to revoke the recommendation that marijuana be made an illegal substance because they were misled. The word marijuana was not even a word ever used. It was slang that the government introduced, and that's the word they actually used when trying to create an illegal laws across about it. It was known as cannabis. And so when the AMA kind of figured out what they were talking about after the effect, it was too late. So in the next slide, again, that just talks about some suppressed research. Nixon also found out in the 1970s, when people say there's no research in cannabis, that's absolutely not true. What there's not research that is government backed for the benefits. All of the government backed research has been for why it's bad for us. So it's always had a slant to it. Nixon was the biggest proponent of this research because he wanted to really show why people were dangerous and could fill the prison systems. What happened was the doctors at the University of Virginia Commonwealth, when they started studying this plant, they found that in lab tests with mice that it stopped the plaque from growing that causes Alzheimer's, and then it killed cancer tumors when you injected high THC. So Nixon then said, burn the evidence, never talk about it again, and he threw it all out, but not before patenting different strains of the cannabis plant for Alzheimer's and cancer. Again, a very dark history. Moving forward, the reason that we teach this and the reason that we're so confident, those of us that understand the plant, is because the scientists behind this realized in the late 1980s that not only does this plant have value, but the plant has value because it is completely in correspondence with a human system that we have never discovered until now because it's somewhat invisible. And it's called our endocannabinoid system. And this is, established science that we have cannabinoids and other components of the cannabis plant. We have the system that this plant modulates either directly or indirectly. And the cannabinoids, which I spoke of earlier, these are the chemical compounds that are identified. Most known are THC and CBD. However, there's many, many more. We just found 2 more in science in the last week. So we're over 200 now. The endocannabinoid system is a network of neuromodulation receptors in our brain, our immune system, and our body. We actually have more of these receptors present in our brain than we do that react with the cannabis plant than we do in our entire body for any other substance. So that's pretty fascinating that our brain, we have evolved with this plant, the way the receptors are in our body, in our brain. They are everywhere but our ability to breathe, which is why you cannot die from the cannabis plant. You cannot take so much that you stop breathing and you die, which is what happens with opiates and others. The terpenoids and the cannabinoids in the plants, they bind to these cannabinoid receptors. THC has a direct binding mechanism and CBD has an indirect. I won't go too far into that because of time, but it's a fascinating chemistry lesson. And basically when this happens, it turns on the other systems of our body, mostly the immune system. So it's the way I like to the metaphor I use is something's not working, a light's not working in your house. You change the light bulb, it still doesn't work. You unplug and replug, it still doesn't work. You go downstairs, you switch the switch, it's still not working. You have to reset the whole house, kind of like your modem or your router. And what the endocannabinoid system we are learning does is it regulates and creates the homeostasis for the immune system, the respiratory system, the cardiovascular, gastroenterology. Everything falls under this umbrella of this before recently unknown system called the endocannabinoid system. However, because cannabis was such a part of human evolution, not in the way that it is today, but just in a very more natural, organic, it grew in the farm, the animals ate it, we used it, it was in our compost, it was in our medicines, it was oftentimes, many scholars believe it's the plant that's the tree of life in the Bible. There is, in every spiritual book, we have found reference to what is believed to be the cannabis plant. So it was just taken for granted that it was helping keep us in some state of balance. And it's not until it was taken out of our systems over the last 100 years that much of the medical research is now looking at that the global epidemic of what we call autoimmune diseases are actually deficiencies in the endocannabinoid system, because we have systematically taken out a piece of our diet and our evolution that we have always had present. And that's why I decided to start practicing and teaching this, because in my opinion, we can offer as many beautiful options in Ayurveda in the way of routine and herbs and oils and foods and meditation and yoga, and that's all beautiful and very effective. However, if the main switch still has not been turned on or hasn't been reset, we're not getting the full potential from Ayurveda. So we need to take, we have to do this for our clients and for me, the whole public of the world. We have to teach this because we have a lot of people walking around out of balance, as everyone in this call knows. And I think it's worse than most people realize. Why terpenes matter is my next slide. And so when talking about this plant, what's important, when we talk about the cannabis plant, there's thousands of strains. So it is not a one size fits all. And that is one of the most difficult challenges in this science, is not only learning, but sharing and teaching with others of how to find the best medicine. The number one thing I can tell you if you walk away with anything is the full plant matters. You know, the reason why CBD is everywhere, you know, going to an expo center like you were saying, and there's 50,000 products with CBD, I would venture to guess 85 or 90% of those were made with isolates or distillates, meaning that a chemical process happened and they literally took out just that molecule of CBD and put it in, 100 different products. That's just gimmick science. That's not real science. So just like in turmeric, we need the whole plant. In ginger, we need the whole root. With ashwagandha, we use the whole plant. We're not isolating out some chemical. The same thing is true with cannabis. And this is why I started my own company. It was because I was having such a hard time finding medicine for my dad. And so I started making my own things, interviewing, learning, studying, going to workshops, expos, science conferences, medical science, cannabis conferences, and just taking notes, learning, and asking questions. And terpenes, because they are the ID of the plant, the characteristic of the plant, different terpenes are in different strains, have different effects. So some are more analgesic, some are going to be more anti-inflammatory, some are going to help more with anxiety, and then learning the difference in the strains helps us create a medicine or find the right plant cultivar for specific people, because it's not a one-size-fits-all by any means. I do have a slide, that's slide number 15, that talks about and shows where the receptors are. And in the middle, there's a diagram. This is a card that I pass out to my clients that I created last year. And it shows all of those little orange and yellowish orange dots are different receptors. All of those receptors communicate directly in a lock and key fashion with the molecules in the cannabis plant. I mean, think about that for a minute. It's fascinating. So, and again, that's a whole other class to talk about how that works, but it is basically helping our body do what it's supposed to do. And in most cases, our body is not doing that. And that's releasing certain chemicals and enzymes and then actually receiving them into our system without burning them up too quickly. One of the most, I think one of the highest, number one complaints, I would say, on top of all other issues in today's world, is anxiety. And understanding the terpenes and cannabinoids for anxiety is really important, because those different percentages are what give our body the ability to feel the way it feels, to experience what it experiences when we take the plant. Excuse me really quick. I have my, everything just came back on in my house, and so everything's beeping now in my house. Okay. Sorry about that. So the terpenes and cannabinoids for anxiety, if you look through those, all of those I list: myrcene, linalool, limonene, except for the CBN, CBD, and THC. Those are just 6 examples out of hundreds. Those are also found in mangoes, in hops, in lavender, in lime, things of that nature. So we're still in the plant world. On the next slide, I talk about how the ECS system or the endocannabinoid system is essential for homeostasis. And these are kind of the main topics that are addressed when we balance our ECS, as it's often called. Mood immediately. Most people, that's the first thing they notice when they start using a good, pure therapeutic product, is they have a shift in their mood. And that then affects often everything else. Or they have a shift in their pain, which then increases their mood. Some of these are some extraneous slides, just things that might be important to talk to kind of just read about. One of the biggest questions that people ask me is about dosing, and everyone's endocannabinoid system is different. So it's just like in Ayurveda, you have two people, let's say a Vata and a Pitta side by side, and they have a similar issue but different causes. They have very well could need a different way of dosing, a different type of ingesting the plant, and a different strain. It's not a one size fits all. The reason that I started one of the things I do with my products that I make is I have 6 different strains that I make 3 different, or more than 3, but multiple combinations thereof that indirectly have a support network in place for Vata, Pitta, and Kapha type aggravations. And then again, on this near the end here, Ayurvedic lifestyle, of course, is just as important. I believe that they all need to be understood in conjunction, and that's my goal and my passion, is when I try to teach people and help people to implement, a form of cannabis into their system. I always make sure that these other things are also in place. It's not like just, now some people that they can't handle any of those things. They can't change their diet. They're not in a place to change the routine. They can barely get out of bed in the morning. So again, that's why I come back to starting with something like a CBD blended tincture, that sometimes that just something that simple can give them a reset that they suddenly can get out of bed. I work with hospice patients. It's been one of the most rewarding things that I've unexpectedly been doing lately. This week I've been helping a woman with her mother who's been transitioning, and for a year we've worked together. Last week we've really been, at night, late at night, helping her with dosing, and her mother is having a very peaceful, non-pharmaceutical induced passing, waiting for the rest of the family to arrive, and she's finally out of pain, and she's taking no morphine, and she has quite a history of medical problems. So again, it's like that allowed her to sit up, that allowed her to suck on some water, that allowed her to actually see her daughter versus being in a haze. So it's just a fascinating, beautiful plant that has earned my respect and really needs to be explored from every angle possible. And that's kind of everything I have. So I'm happy. I know that I talked a little bit past. I lost a little bit of time there with my power outage. So I'd love to open it up for any questions.
Joanna, one very burning question. So I have come across with a few yogis who are suffering from bipolar disorders. Mm-hmm. And they also have been taking marijuana, and some other people who also are healthy, the blood report is normal, but they have very severe insomnia. And they are sticking to this because they say, we can't drop this, we can drop food, but not this one because it helps us to improve insomnia. And there are some other, individuals I have come across with. So my question to you is, for example, if the terpenes or cannabinoids are the part of the immune system or the mood or brain system, are they taking along with the medication because it helps them to sleep, number one? Number two, what is the kind of reaction with the strong medication they're taking, for example, Depakote and others, and lithium for bipolar disorders? So can you just explain with the experience?
So is your question about taking it along, the interaction with the drug that they're taking, the pharmaceutical?
For bipolar disorders, yes.
Okay, much of which, specifically that drug, I do not know. I can point you to a resource where they list different medications and there's about 60 that are listed in that. I would direct you to my website, but it's under technical difficulty today, so I can give you a different site to go to. Oftentimes what happens with pharmaceuticals, if you are using, especially like an oil, inhaling, if there's like smoking it or vaping it, it has much lower interaction with a pharmaceutical. It's more when they're taking it in either an edible or a sublingual. Sublingual is my preferred choice of ingestion. What it can do is it can slow down the effect, potentially, not always. It can slow down the amount of time it takes to metabolize the pharmaceuticals they're on. And in many cases, if that is the case, they will need less of the pharmaceutical. And that's often how patients are able to slowly, when it's available or when it's available to them and with the help of their doctor, work their way off of medication. So there's been an incredible response, and we're still in anecdotal places of, research of this, where people are able to come off of medications they never thought possible. I was able to come off my thyroid medication. I have hyperthyroid. I'm diagnosed with Graves' disease, and I don't take any medication for it. And I was on beta blockers. I had a heart condition. I was on, synthetic, I was on a regulator for my thyroid. They wanted to remove my thyroid. And as I built up my tolerance with cannabis oil, I reduced, and Ayurvedic herbs, I reduced my pharmaceuticals to where I didn't take them anymore. And same with I haven't taken any meds for Crohn's disease now in 15 years. So, but there are some cases where certain drugs take longer or they speed through faster. So many times, for instance, with chemotherapy, if someone, and the research has been very positive on people that do choose chemotherapy with a cannabis oil supplement, they fare like 50% to 80% better. They don't often lose their sense of taste. They have a better appetite. They sleep better. They have less pain, and they need less of the chemo drug itself. So there's been such a positive reaction. However, it needs to be understood that different drugs have different interactions. I'm sorry, I can't speak specifically of that drug. I would myself research it. My favorite research, my two favorite places to go for that kind of information, and I'm one of their preferred providers, which is nice. So they recommend me and I recommend them for both doing good ethical work, is a nonprofit education called Project CBD. And they have researched it, like a whole forum and research. And I believe on their website, they have the current list of drugs and their interactions with cannabis. And the second one is called Patients, like we have patients or clients, Patients Out of Time. And they are also a nonprofit education organization made up of doctors, nurses, and practitioners with their PubMed and like private clinical research that they keep posted. And those are what I use. So if I have someone come to me, I do, and they give me their pharmaceuticals, I use like a software program where I first look for just potential drug interactions, not even thinking about cannabis, because sometimes that's an issue where they're taking two drugs causing a problem and no doctor has caught it. In a simple search, you can figure it out on your own. And then I will go to the next level and research what they're taking and how it may or may not be interacting with the cannabis. Oftentimes the cannabis helps it be more effective, and then you need less of the pharmaceutical.
Sure.
But not always.
Thank you very much. It's very helpful. And then I'll be in touch with you separately also. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful.
And this is Catherine, and I have a question about, I think I sent to our whole WhatsApp group about photos of my friend that's really suffering with this fungus or anything. And I'd really love to hear what you have to say about cannabis oil treatment for him.
Yes. Okay. So I'm glad hi, Catherine. Yeah, you emailed me too. Yeah, I'm glad that that you asked that question, because one of the things, and so let me a quick story with my dad. So when he had his cancer, he also had all of these other lesions, and they were basal cell or squamous cell. They were not melanomas, but all these cancers, he's bald, all over his head over the years. He had one melanoma 20 years ago that was removed. Now, what we've learned about melanoma, or all cancers, that when you cut, you're spreading the stem cell of the cancer. So even a biopsy helps spread the cancer, which those are things most patients don't know about. So with skin issues, now you're talking about the largest organ, you have an issue. He was constantly having cuts and burns and skin grafting, and they were moving his face around. He went through a ton. We switched over to topical, and this was my very beginning of learning of cannabis oil. And what we would do is I'd mix him in oil and put it in either coconut or olive oil and spread it. What it does is it helps draw to the surface the cancer cells or fungus or bacteria, because it draws that out. It has a strong drawing action. It's a very strong oil, very, very viscous, like molasses. And he started having his spots and tumors look worse for the first few days, which is exactly what I expected. That was what I had learned. And so it was just convincing him that keep doing it, don't stop. He's like, it's getting worse, it's getting worse. I'm like, no, what's happening is the things that you can't see are being pulled to the top, and then it erupted, and then it scabbed over, and then he looked like a brand new baby's head. His dermatologist of 20 years could not believe it. Like, what happened to you? So the more I started learning, I started watching, and you can YouTube this, like go online and do some videos, cannabis oil for topical skin lesions. And you spread it on kind of like you would do, and I would actually, well, I'm not going to give too much advice, but what I would do if you were using this is not only to be using it internally, but to making an external paste and putting it on, which I know would be very difficult having seen those photos, and then covering it. And then every third day, removing and doing that again. And it might take a long time, but I have a woman right now with cancer growing across her face, and she's been my client for 4 years. She has breast cancer. She's a nurse in her 80s, and she refuses to, she wants to only do it with herbs. She believes so much in what we're doing because we've helped to get rid of her cancer. So now she's dealing with her face, and it's getting worse. We're in that week where it's spreading, and we're both nervous, but at the same time, it makes sense because if you understand the science behind how it's pulling things to the surface, it's cleaning it up, it's killing any kind of bacteria or fungus. It's like a selective kill. It's pretty amazing how it works. It doesn't just, it's not like an antibiotic. It's the way herbs work. They're gentler. They're more targeted and how, I don't know, it's a special property of the plant. But I would highly recommend he look into that, or if you're working with him, and I can work with you on the side to kind of give you some other recommendations after this call.
That's really great. Thank you. And
but
I
in his case, I would think he would need more than just CBD. He's going to need the full THC and the CBD, the plant, not just the CBD product. It needs to really be a strong product.
Yeah, and he'd be open to that for sure. Great, thank you.
Good. Yeah, you're welcome. Any questions?
There's one question from Eileen about, she says, I have many Ayurveda herbal books, but cannabis is not mentioned. Do you know why?
Yes, because it's been prohibited for almost 100 years around the world. That's why. And especially when the British and the Americans are very aligned. And when now as far as ancient texts, it wasn't called, they had different names. So by Jaya, Zana, if you Google in, that you can find different names of how it is described. I do have some reference to some books from India in the 1800s. And I'll be honest, I've been so busy on more of the modern research for the last couple of years, and I have had some criticism from Ayurvedic practitioners around this, and I understand where they're coming from. But most of my research has been on how it's being used now and why, and how to incorporate that with Ayurveda. I haven't had the time or the energy, especially starting a product company, to go find in the classical text where what verse and text and how it's used, because frankly, to me, we don't have time for that right now. I would love other people to do that. And I think it's extremely important to learn how they would dry the roots and pulverize and make milk out of it. They made a tea out of it called bang, and that was made just like a chai, but it's also with the plant ground up and cooked a certain way in milk. And that was used oftentimes to help give energy for laborers, because in the afternoon they would start to slump, and that would help give them energy and create I think one of the quotes in one of my books from the early 1800s, it's a government book actually, is about how it makes for a lightened sense of mood or something like that. So I don't have specific places that it's talked about in the ancient text, because I've really just focused on how and now. Because, like, for instance, when my dad was potentially dying in front of me, I didn't care what the old text said about cannabis. I just knew that doctors right now that are studying this have found that it can stop the growth of cancer and it can kill it. And so that's what I did. That's where I focused my time. But I would love somebody to do that and to really find, to use that maybe as a research project. And if I, when I come back to school at some point in the near future, that is probably going to be my topic, but it's just one that I don't have the time for right now, unfortunately.
All right. Thank you so much, Joanna. This was very educational, and I really enjoyed learning a lot of new things about cannabis. If if people have questions for you, is there an email contact that you may like to drop in here? I can put it here in the chat window so people can send you any other questions that come up, or you can post them in the WhatsApp group. I will share a link. I will share a link to the slides as well as the recording in the next couple of days. But thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And I hope you enjoyed this talk as much as I did.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
everybody. Very
And zvedawisdom@gmail.com. And my product company is called Zveda. And the name of that came from the two words Zana and Veda, so the kind of the wisdom of cannabis, and I just shortened it for my products. So Zeta Veda is like the parent company, but and it's z-veda.com. Today it's under construction, so it may not look right, but I woke up to a bit of a disaster on my website this morning. So hopefully by the end of today or tomorrow it'll be fixed.
Awesome. Good luck on that, Jo. And thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks everyone for listening. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.